The men and women alive in 476 AD, the year the final Western emperor was deposed by a Germanic chieftain and sent to live out his days in a villa in Campania, were not watching a civilization collapse in real time and taking notes. They were trying to pay rent, they were watching their purchasing power erode, they were watching the administrative positions that used to go to Roman citizens increasingly go to Germanic foederati who would work for less. They were watching their institutions become corrupt and performative. They were watching the men who were supposed to lead them serve themselves. And the entertainment on offer, the circuses, the spectacle, the bread and distraction, had never been more abundant or more hollow. Born just in time for artificial intelligence to begin eliminating the entry-level jobs they spent 3 years and £40,000 in debt to qualify for. Born just in time for the housing market to price them out a decade before they could realistically save a deposit. Born just in time for the birth rate to collapse below replacement level, for the dating apps to charge them for access to a market structurally rigged against them, for the streaming platforms to sell their attention to casino companies, and for every institution that was supposed to be on their side to either fail them quietly or exploit them loudly. That is the mainstream explanation, the lazy generation. The generation that cannot save because it spends, that cannot work because it lacks resilience, that cannot cope because it was coddled. This explanation has been repeated so many times in so many newspaper columns and political speeches and dinner table conversations between people who bought their homes in 1987 for a figure that would not cover the deposit on the same property today that it has acquired the texture of received wisdom. The average house in America cost around $120,000 in 1990. Today, it costs over $500,000. In Britain, the average house price is over £300,000. In Sydney, Australia, the median house price exceeds $1 million Australian dollars. These numbers have not risen because Gen Z are spending their down payments on lifestyle choices. They have risen because of deliberate policy decisions made over 30 years that prioritized asset price inflation over affordability, that treated property as an investment vehicle rather than shelter, and that allowed an entire generation of property owners to watch their net worth compound, while the generation trying to enter the market behind them got progressively more locked out with every passing year. The median age of a first-time homebuyer in America reached 38 years old in 2024, the oldest ever recorded. The share of first-time buyers has collapsed from 50% of the market in 2007 to 21% in 2025. 97% of Gen Z say they want to own a home. 53% do not expect to be able to until they are over 40. The average Gen Z net worth in the early 20s is negative $22,000, not zero. Negative. Baby boomers at the same age had 86% more purchasing power. That gap did not emerge from personal choices, it emerged from structural decisions about interest rates, planning restrictions, tax treatment of buy-to-let investment, and the deliberate suppression of housing supply made by people who were already inside the system, in favour of people who were already inside the system at the cost of everyone arriving behind them. The philosopher John Rawls argued in A Theory of Justice that a just society is one whose rules you would endorse even if you did not know in advance which position you would occupy within it. Behind what he called the veil of ignorance, not knowing whether you would be born in 1955 or in 2000, not knowing whether you would enter adulthood with inherited assets or with student debt, you would not design the system that currently exists. The fact that the people who did design it knew exactly which side of that line they were on tells you everything about whose interest it was actually serving. That is the thesis of this video. Not that Gen Z are passive victims, not that there is a single shadowy conspiracy. The thesis is more precise and more damning than either. Gen Z were promised a deal. Work hard, get educated, play by the rules, the deal will be honoured. The deal was not honoured. The people who benefited most from the old deal quietly changed the terms while continuing to issue the same instructions, and then, when the outcomes stopped materializing, blamed the generation for failing to produce them. And into the gap between what Gen Z was promised and what they actually got, an industry rushed to extract whatever remained. That industry is the second half of this video. But first you need to understand the full scale of what was taken and what it means to be young in a civilization that is changing faster than any Western generation has ever had to absorb. Start with work. In the United Kingdom, 1.2 million graduate applications were submitted for 17,000 graduate roles in a single year. 70 people competing for every available position. A graduate interviewed by ITV News sent 500 applications before landing an apprenticeship he could have done without his degree. Entry-level job postings globally fell 29% between January 2024 and early 2025. UK graduates are earning 30% less in real terms than millennials did at the same stage of their careers. In America, youth unemployment hit 10.8% in the summer of 2025, more than double the overall rate of 4.3. Nearly 1 million young people in the UK are classified as NEET, not in education, employment, or training, the highest since the aftermath of the 2008 crash. The World Economic Forum estimates 41% of organisations plan to reduce headcount before 2030 due to automation. The jobs going first are the junior, administrative, entry-level roles that previous generations used to start careers, disappearing at exactly the moment Gen Z needs them most. I have a mate who studied law at university in London, smart guy, came out with his degree, and spent the following year getting nothing back. No offers, firms not hiring, bills mounting. He ended up doing Amazon deliveries, 9-hour days, about 1,500 quid a month. He needed a way out and started seeing lads on Instagram showing trading profits, talking about systems and financial freedom, and ended up buying a course and then a gambling referral link. He is 24 now, in debt, on antidepressants, working in retail. Nobody in that chain cared what happened to him after the money moved. He was not a customer, he was a revenue source. And he is everywhere. Now, something almost nobody in mainstream politics will discuss honestly. Young people across the Western world increasingly describe feeling that they are competing for jobs, housing, and opportunities in their own communities in ways their parents did not. This is documented across surveys in every major Western country. In the United States, foreign-born workers now represent 19.8% of the entire workforce, a record high, up from 16.7% just 5 years ago. 1.2 million immigrants joined the American workforce in 2024 alone, more than offsetting a fall in native-born workers entering the labour market. In Australia, more than 1 in 4 workers is foreign-born. Canada runs active express entry programs specifically designed to attract skilled workers from abroad, with employers regularly preferring candidates who accept lower initial wages than domestic graduates expect after years of expensive education and debt. But the specific experience of a 22-year-old domestic graduate competing for an entry-level role against a qualified professional from abroad, willing to work for less, in a housing market he cannot enter, servicing debt he cannot escape, is a genuine economic reality being felt by real people and denied by most of the political class. There is a historical irony worth sitting with here. In the 4th and 5th centuries, the Roman administration increasingly staffed its military and civil positions with Germanic foederati, men from outside the empire willing to serve at lower cost than Roman citizens required. The arrangement was rational at every individual decision point. The aggregate consequence over generations was that the Romans gradually stopped running their own civilization. The parallel is imperfect, history rarely repeats with precision, but the structural logic of an empire distributing its positions and opportunities to whoever is cheapest to employ, while its domestic young inherit the debt and the difficulty, is not without resonance. Now look at the political class, because this is the institution most directly responsible for the conditions Gen Z is navigating, and the gap between what it presents itself as and what it demonstrably is has become one of the most radicalizing forces in Western political life. Keir Starmer in Britain has an approval rating of 32%. Emmanuel Macron in France sits at 18%. Olaf Scholz in Germany was removed from office at the same number. The G7 summit of 2024 was described as the most collectively unpopular gathering of leaders on Earth. In 1958, Pew Research asked Americans whether they trusted their government to do what is right. 75% said yes. In 2024, they asked the same question. 17% said yes. Among people under 30, only 47% trusted their electoral system. Nearly half of the youngest voting generation in the democratic world has stopped believing the machinery of democracy is real, not because they have been radicalized, because they have been watching. And what they watched in 2026 was instructive. Donald Trump campaigned on no more wars, no new military entanglements, America first. On the 28th of February 2026, he launched Operation Epic Fury, a joint American-Israeli military campaign against Iran, without congressional authorization, without sustained public debate, with American service members dying in a war nobody voted for. Every major Western government, of every political persuasion, is simultaneously at historic lows in public trust. The institutions built to protect ordinary people are protecting themselves. The promise is made. The terms change. The generation bears the cost. This has happened before. Gibbon wrote in The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire that the Romans in their final generations were no longer capable of the civic virtue that the Republic had required, not because they were lesser men, because the institutions that had produced civic virtue had been hollowed out so thoroughly that there was no longer a structure within which virtue could be exercised. Men who would have been soldiers became spectators. Men who would have been senators became administrators of a bureaucracy they did not control. The energy was still there. The channels that once directed it were gone. Oswald Spengler published The Decline of the West in 1918 and argued that Western civilization had entered its late phase, characterized by the dominance of money over everything else, by democracy becoming indistinguishable from plutocracy, by the emergence of what he called the world city, the vast rootless metropolis that severs men from land, from tradition, from any sense of belonging to a specific place and people. He described the late man, the final product of a civilization in its last phase, who consumes without creating, who is clever without being wise, who understands irony perfectly and conviction not at all, who has everything the civilization ever produced available to him and finds it all insufficient. Spengler was writing about 1918. He was also, with uncomfortable accuracy, writing about the specific psychological type that 5-second videos and parasocial influencer relationships and permanent ironic detachment select for and reward. The late man of 1918 had to make a genuine effort to achieve rootlessness. The late man of 2024 has it delivered to his phone. Alexis de Tocqueville saw a version of this coming in 1835. He wrote about what he called soft despotism, a tyranny that does not need chains because it keeps people comfortable, meets their immediate gratifications, and over time diminishes their capacity for serious thought, collective action, and genuine independence. He wrote that over such men stands an immense and tutelary power which takes upon itself alone to secure their gratifications and to watch over their lot. It seeks to keep them in perpetual childhood. He wrote this 200 years ago about a theoretical future. The algorithm is the tutelary power he described. It watches over the lot of a generation. It secures their gratifications. It has no interest whatsoever in preparing them for anything. And Gen Z is the first generation to navigate all of this while also living through a technological transition without historical precedent. Artificial intelligence is not arriving as a tool that will improve their lives in the way previous technologies were sold. It is arriving as a structural competitor to their labour. The entry-level white-collar jobs that were already disappearing are disappearing faster now. The legal research that my mate in London spent 3 years training to do can be done in 4 seconds by a program that costs less per month than his coffee. The coding, the analysis, the drafting, the administrative functions, the junior work that previous generations used to learn their craft is being automated at the exact moment the generation that needed that work most is entering the labour market. They were not born at the beginning of an AI revolution, positioned to ride it upward. They were born just in time to arrive at the door as it was closing. And on top of that, climate, geopolitics, the fracturing of the international order that the post-war generation built, the return of great power conflict, the war in Iran that nobody under 30 voted for. Gen Z will live through more civilizational change in their lifetimes than any Western generation since the people who were young in 1914. Except the people who were young in 1914 were handed a reason, however terrible, to matter. They were necessary. The war needed them. The nation needed them. The machine ground them up, but it could not pretend they did not exist. Gen Z are facing a civilizational inflection point of comparable scale while being told they are optional, that their labour can be replaced, that their housing need can be deferred, that their political interests can be ignored. The stakes are as high as they have ever been, and the institutional recognition of their existence is lower than it has ever been. This is the ground Gen Z is standing on. And now meet the people who built an industry on it. Gen Z does not watch television. Television was regulated, broadcast standards, advertising restrictions, regulatory bodies. None of that exists on the platforms where Gen Z lives. The average Gen Z person spends over 4 hours daily on their phone. 63% use social media for financial information. 56% trust financial information found on social media. The algorithm serving them has no regulatory obligation to protect them. In 1970, the psychologist B.F. Skinner published Beyond Freedom and Dignity, building on decades of research into variable ratio reinforcement. He found that the most addictive reward schedule is not a consistent one. Not every time, not never, randomly and unpredictably. Animals in a Skinner box would exhaust themselves chasing the next reward because the unpredictability of it made stopping impossible. The slot machine was engineered on this exact principle. The TikTok scroll is the same mechanism applied to a phone screen. The gambling app is the same mechanism applied to a deposit. The social media notification is the same mechanism applied to human attention. This is not metaphor. It is the same psychological architecture discovered in a laboratory in the 1950s, now deployed at civilizational scale against a generation that has never known anything else. Shoshana Zuboff published The Age of Surveillance Capitalism in 2019 and argued that the platforms had developed a new economic logic in which human experience itself had become a raw material. Not that users were the product, that they were the raw material, the ore being mined. Their attention, their emotional states, their daily patterns, their moments of loneliness and desperation, converted into behavioral data, sold as predictions about their future behavior to the highest bidder. The gambling industry is the highest bidder, the course sellers are among the highest bidders, the dating apps are among the highest bidders. Every time a young man in financial desperation picks up his phone, he is producing raw material for the companies targeting him. He thinks he is using an app, he is the app being used. The gambling industry understood this first. In 2017, legal sports betting revenue in America was $248 million. By 2024, it was $13.7 billion, a 55-fold increase in 7 years. Gen Z is now on track to become the dominant gambling consumer segment in America, spending more per capita on betting than any other generation. 37% describe themselves as addicted, 14% higher than the general average. The average Gen Z gambler spent nearly $2,000 gambling in the last 12 months, $2,000 from a generation with a negative net worth and no path into the housing market. Kick was founded by Stake, one of the world's largest online casino companies, specifically to use streaming content as a pipeline into their gambling products. The streams are the advertisement. The casino is the product. 53% of Gen Z men watch live streams at least weekly. Among 18 to 24-year-olds, streaming has overtaken every other form of media. This is the audience Kick was built to reach. Adin Ross, at his peak, was paid approximately $1 million a week by Stake to stream gambling to that audience. An 11-year-old fan publicly admitted to gambling on Stake after watching his streams. He signed a $100 million deal with a competing platform called Rainbet. Felix Lengyel, known as XQC, wagered $2.95 billion on Stake across over 1 million bets, admitted moderate addiction, then signed a $100 million deal with Kick, owned by the same casino. The man with the gambling problem was paid $100 million to keep gambling on camera by the company whose product he could not stop using. This is not a flaw in the system, this is the system. Oxford University named brain rot Word of the Year in 2024, usage up 230% in a single year. The American Psychological Association reviewed 71 peer-reviewed studies confirming that excessive short-form video consumption directly reduces memory, attention span, and executive function. Pope Francis in 2025 used the phrase putrefazione cerebrale in a public address, brain putrefaction. The head of the Catholic Church used a medical term to describe what he was watching happen to an entire generation. Henry David Thoreau wrote about brain rot in 1854. He described a society beginning to prefer trivial, easy stimulation over serious thought and what that preference does to people over time. He wrote it in a cabin in Massachusetts in the 19th century. 170 years later, Oxford named it Word of the Year, a civilization diagnosing itself. Now, the loneliness industry. Because before the course sellers arrive, something else has to be already gone. Robert Putnam documented in Bowling Alone in 2001 of the most consequential and least discussed social shifts in modern Western history. Since the 1970s, every form of civic and community life in America had been declining without interruption. Church attendance, union membership, civic clubs, sports leagues, neighborhood associations, every structure that once provided young men with belonging, purpose, accountability, and genuine friendship had been eroding for 30 years before Gen Z was born. Gen Z did not lose community. They were born into its absence, and the platforms that replaced those structures had no interest in producing the same outcomes. They were interested in monetizing the gap. The Survey Center on American Life found that 15% of American men now have 0 close friends. In 1990, that figure was 3%, a 5-fold increase in 35 years. 26% of men report having 6 or more close friends today, down from 55% in 1990. Gallup aggregated data from 2023 and 2024 and found 25% of American men aged 15 to 34 said they felt lonely on any given day, against a national average of 18% and an OECD median of 15 for young men. Young American men are the loneliest cohort in the developed world. 40% of men report feeling lonely at least once a week. Two-thirds of young men aged 18 to 23 told Equimundo in 2023 that no one really knows them well. Men are 3.3 times more likely than women to die from deaths of despair, suicide, overdose, alcohol-related illness. The US Surgeon General declared loneliness a national epidemic. The health risk of chronic social isolation is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. This is the wreckage the course sellers, platforms, and gambling companies found waiting for them. Young men with no male community, no belonging, no one who actually knows them. No shared hardship that produces the specific trust that only comes from going through something real together. Andrew Tate positioned himself as the Brotherhood. 200,000 subscribers at $49.99 a month, $10 million a month. His War Room membership cost $4,497. The product was not the business advice, the product was the feeling of belonging to something. Former members describe it as cult-like precisely because cults are the most efficient technology ever invented for filling the specific need Tate was selling against. Hamza Ahmed, 2.28 million subscribers, positioned as the older brother. $129 a month, $200,000 a month in revenue. He posted publicly that he made a mistake by shifting from genuinely helping his audience to monetizing them. That is on record in his own words. Logan Paul raised $18.5 million for CryptoZoo, a blockchain game he called a really fun game that makes you money. A 20-year-old named Ruben Tauk asked his father for £50,000 to invest. More than a year later, the money was essentially gone. The game was never built. Not built badly, never built. A journalist called CoffeeZilla exposed it in a 3-part investigation. Paul threatened to sue him, deleted the threat, apologized, promised refunds. 8 months later, nothing had happened. He then sued CoffeeZilla for defamation for continuing to report on the story. The class action was dismissed on a legal technicality. Nobody got their money back. The looks-maxing pipeline is the same mechanism applied to physical appearance. Jaw exercises, bone-smashing techniques, appearance optimization programs sold on TikTok and Kick as routes to transformation that are really routes to purchasing. Tens of billions of views in 2024. The product is not the outcome. The product is the hope that the outcome is available if you buy the right things. Now look at what happened to dating, because the collapse of the dating market for young men is one of the most documented and least honestly discussed crises of this generation. Tinder has 75 million monthly active users. 76 to 78% of those users are men. The match rate for men is 0.6%. For women, it is 10%. 95 to 96% of Tinder's paying subscribers are men. The men are not just the majority of users, they are almost the entire revenue base. A man with a 0.6% match rate logging in 11 times a day, spending 90 minutes on the app, 530 hours a year, is not using a dating service. He is performing the ritual of trying to connect while being denied connection and paying for the privilege. Tinder lost 594,000 UK users in a single year. Match Group, the parent company of Tinder and Hinge, has reported declining paid user numbers for over 7 consecutive quarters. 75% of Gen Z report burnout from traditional dating apps. 45% report frustration and hopelessness. 91% of men on Tinder agree dating has become more difficult. A 2024 study found that emotional exhaustion only increased among participants the longer they used dating apps, with 38% developing symptoms consistent with clinical depression after 12 weeks of regular use. The model is simple. Create a platform where 77% of users are men competing for 23% who are women. Charge the men for the tools to compete more effectively in a competition structured so the majority cannot win. Apply Skinner's variable ratio reinforcement so the random small reward keeps them logging in. Collect the subscriptions, move on to the next quarter. The suffering is the product. The hope that it ends if you upgrade is the business model. This connects to something deeper that explains why so many young men have simply stopped trying, not just on dating apps, with everything. The risk-reward relationship that organizes human motivation has been destroyed for Gen Z in a way that has no historical precedent. In a functioning society, young people take risks because the rewards for succeeding are available and the cost of failure is survivable. You risk years of expensive education because employment and income are on the other side. You endure low-paid entry-level work because career progression above it is real. You save and sacrifice for a decade because home ownership is actually achievable. You put yourself through the vulnerability of dating because meaningful relationships are possible. Every one of these risk-reward calculations has been broken for Gen Z simultaneously. The education no longer reliably produces employment. The employment no longer reliably produces income sufficient for the life that was advertised. The home ownership is not achievable on any realistic timeline. The dating market returns a 0.6% match rate and clinical depression symptoms. The risk is as real as it ever was. The reward has been removed. And a generation that has run these calculations repeatedly and found them failing has started, rationally, to stop making them. The birth rate in America hit a record low of 1.59 in 2024. The replacement rate is 2.1. South Korea's fertility rate is below 1. Germany, Japan, and China have already passed peak population. 84% of Gen Z say economic conditions influence whether they plan to have children. When a generation stops reproducing, it is not making an economic calculation. It is making a civilizational verdict. It is saying, without coordination, that the conditions of life as they currently exist are not worth perpetuating. That is the ultimate measure of what happens when exploitation at this scale meets a generation with no remaining margin. Now, what this same machine has done to young women. Most young women are on TikTok. TikTok has its own exploitation pipeline that is more pervasive than anything targeting men, because it does not look like exploitation, it looks like empowerment. Thousands of accounts, mostly run by women in their late 20s and 30s who have already figured out the game, sell to teenage girls a version of life that requires purchasing to access. The aesthetic apartment, the Pilates, the skincare stack, the financially independent girl boss era. The content creates an identity. The identity creates the desire for the products. The products do not deliver the identity because the identity was never real. It was the product from the first frame. OnlyFans generated $7.2 billion in revenue in 2024. The owner took $500 million in personal dividends in 2021 and 2022 alone. The average creator earns $131 a month after the platform takes its 20%. 86% of female creators are between 18 and 24. The top 0.1% earns 76% of all revenue. Sophie Rain is 21 years old. She grew up on food stamps in Miami. She became within 2 years one of the highest earning creators in OnlyFans history, with documented earnings of over $100 million. She has said publicly the average creator makes about $150 a month and that the permanent digital footprint and the risks are real. She said this to millions of young girls on TikTok. The next day, Piper Roquel, a YouTube child star who turned 18 in August 2025, launched her account on the first day of 2026. The cycle does not stop because someone tells the truth inside it. Huxley published Brave New World in 1932. His dystopia was not pain and censorship, it was pleasure and distraction. His world state kept people passive not through force but through soma, a drug that produced the feeling of happiness without the substance behind it. The gambling app is soma, the brain rot stream is soma, the course subscription is soma, the Tinder session is soma. Each one delivers a feeling that substitutes for something real. None require anything genuinely difficult from you. They just require you to keep consuming. And a generation that is financially desperate, chronically lonely, informationally saturated, and spiritually empty is the easiest generation in history to keep consuming indefinitely. De Boer in The Society of the Spectacle wrote that everything directly lived has moved away into a representation. You do not live, you watch, you do not participate, you consume. The stream is the spectacle, the viewer is the commodity. What he described theoretically in 1967 is the literal operational model of every platform Gen Z lives on. The viewer is the raw material Zuboff identified, being converted into behavioral data, sold as predictions, used to build more addictive products, to extract more raw material. And the generation being processed through this machine is being told that their inability to thrive inside it is a personal failure. But something is shifting that none of these businesses planned for and that none of them can easily respond to. Gen Z men are going back to church. The Barna Group confirmed that between 2019 and 2025, the number of Gen Z men reporting a personal commitment to Jesus increased by 15%. 30 million more Americans say they have made Jesus a priority since 2021. The Christian share of America, falling consistently for decades, has stabilized. Pew Research records it at 62 to 63%, essentially flat, for 5 years after nearly 2 decades of continuous decline. Gen Z men are now attending weekly religious services at higher rates than millennials, and for the first time in recorded data, at higher rates than women their age. In Britain, church attendance among 18 to 24-year-olds jumped from 4% in 2018 to 16% in 2024, with a 21% gain specifically among young men. In France, the Catholic Church baptized over 17,000 people in 2024, the highest in over 20 years. And alongside that, the history revival. The same young men being sold course subscriptions by men who have never built anything except a course are going to the biographies of Caesar and Cromwell and Wellington and Eisenhower. They are watching documentaries about the Western Front and the Pacific. They are sharing photographs of soldiers who had genuine brotherhood and something worth dying for. They feel something in that material they cannot find anywhere in the commercial world around them. There is something worth saying about what this means historically. The young men of late Rome did not mostly produce a spiritual revival. They produced the thing after the fall. It was the generation that came after the collapse, the generation that had nothing left to lose and nothing left to be distracted by, that built the monasteries, that preserved the manuscripts, that kept the Latin alive. What Gen Z are doing, the reaching back toward faith and history and physical discipline and genuine male community, looks like that. Not a collapse, a preparation. A generation sensing that something is ending and trying to grab hold of something real before it is gone. Is feeling the gap between what he was built for and what the world is offering him. He was built to carry something real, to stand beside other men in service of something that matters, to face genuine difficulty and not turn away from it. The world is offering him a gambling app and a brain rot stream and a 0.6% Tinder match rate and a monthly subscription. The gap between what he needs and what he is being sold is so large that he is going to the past to prove to himself that the better thing actually existed, that it was real, that men like him once had access to it, that the hunger he feels is not a disorder, it is the correct response to having been robbed. Archbishop Fulton Sheen wrote in the 1950s that young people have a potency for sacrifice far greater than adults realize. They want to give themselves to something, a commitment, an engagement, something worth dying for. Christianity offers that. The course sellers never could, the gambling platforms never could. None of the exploitation in this video can give a young man standing in a church at 6 a.m, reading words that men have read in the same posture for 2,000 years. What that gives him. The sense that something real is required of him, not his subscription, not his behavioural data, his life. The men going back are not going because they were raised to. Many of them were not. They are going because they looked at everything the modern world offered them and found it hollow. The exploitation created the hunger. The hunger found what the exploitation could never provide. The last generation of Rome did not know they were the last generation, but some of them, the ones who walked away from the spectacle and into the desert, who built something small and real and lasting in the wreckage of something enormous and hollow, understood that the question was not whether the empire would fall. The question was what you chose to become in the time that remained. Gen Z were born just in time for the wars nobody voted for, the AI that is taking their jobs, the houses they cannot buy, the institutions that have failed them, the platforms that have mined them, and the silence where a civilization's promise used to be. They were also born just in time to be the generation that decides what comes next. The cattle are beginning to notice the fence.